Homosexuality. Definition of terms. Homosexuality is romantic attraction, sexual attraction, or sexual behavior between members of the same sex or gender. As a sexual orientation, homosexuality is an enduring pattern of emotional, romantic, and/or sexual attractions to people of the same sex.
Gender is the range of characteristics pertaining to femininity and masculinity and differentiating between them. Depending on the context, this may include sex-based social structures, for example, gender roles and gender identity. Most cultures use a gender binary having two genders, boys or men, and girls or women.
Gender identity is the personal sense of one's own gender. Gender identity can correlate with a person's assigned sex or can differ from it. In most individuals, the various biological determinants of sex are congruent and consistent with the individual's gender identity.
There are many different gender identities, including male, female, transgender, gender neutral, non-binary, agender, pangender, genderqueer, two-spirit, and third gender.
Sex is a trait that determines an individual's reproductive function, male or female.
Sexual orientation is enduring pattern of romantic or sexual attraction of persons of opposite sex, gender, the same sex or gender, or the both sexes are more than gender.
Statistics Global.
In 2021, Ipsos interviewed people in 27 countries spanning all continents on their sexual orientation and gender identity. For some countries, the samples were weighted for representativity, but in others with less internet access, they skewed more urban. In this survey, 80% of people worldwide identified as heterosexual, 3% as homosexual, 4% as bisexual, and 1% each as pansexual, asexual, and other.
Statistics National.
A young adult fertility and sexuality survey conducted in 2013 by the University of the Philippines found that 96.2% of youth describe themselves as straight, heterosexual, 2.1% describe themselves as gay or lesbian, while 1.7% are bisexual. Of men, 2.4% describe themselves as gay, while 1.8% of women describe themselves as lesbian.
The Ethical Dilemma.
It's okay to be gay and Filipino, but only if you're a celebrity. From social media influencers like Bretman Rock to TV personalities like Boy Abunda and Vice Ganda, our titas love seeing LGBTQ celebrities on the screen. But how many of us still have loved ones that can't bring their true selves to family gatherings or live in fear of facing violence with no guarantee of justice, protection, or even support from the community? After all, in 2021, state legislatures across the U.S. had a record of over 100 bills introduced to restrict trans rights. Internationally, 350 trans people were killed in 2020 alone. And this doesn't even paint the full picture, because violence against trans people is often underreported. So, Filipinos love LGBTQ folks when they're entertainers, but do they show the same love for LGBTQ folks in their personal lives?
Although in a general worldview of homosexuality, it is not considered immoral or unnatural. To this day, the term gender has been more and more expounded, and its definition has ever been expanding. In contrast, our idea and definition of gender and sex is much different than of the people in the past. As new gender identities rise with the modern time, more and more people engage in these loosely defined groups and communities shared with the common culture and social movements. In one instance, Paul writes in the book of Romans, chapter 1, verses 26 to 27, it says, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with the woman and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. As churches grapple with their identity and place in modern, postmodern societies, homosexuality has become a contentious issue. This issue has become increasingly painful and divisive among Christians on opposing sides of the debate. The conflict is ostensibly about homosexuality, but it is really about the status, interpretation, and various critical conclusions of the Bible. And this is where the ethical dilemma arises. Religious groups, churches, and cultures are becoming strict with gender identities, such as those involved in the LGBTQIA+ circle. At first glance, the problem doesn't arise, but not until you see discrimination, violence, domination, and self-righteousness that is existing underneath the conflict between religion and the LGBTQIA+ community. This continuing problem has been one of the causes of major social mix-ups in the history of humanity. The ethical
I think
resolution.
the church, as we engage with the LGBT community, we have to first and foremost not see them as our enemies. They are not our opponents. If we are saturated with the message of the gospel, no person really should ever be our opponent. I mean, Jesus himself says, love your enemies. There's no way around that as much as it may seem at times, how even media might portray how the LGBT community, even though that might not always be true, but the LGBT community might be in opposition to the church or the message of Jesus Christ. We just always need to remember that these are people. These are people that were very much like I was. These are people that need to know Jesus Christ. These are people who are now blinded, and they need to hear the life-giving news of the gospel. So I think as a church, first and foremost, these are people. These people that are created in God's image. And so I think having that paradigm shift, even in the midst of what's going on in government and public policy and Supreme Court, I think when I watch the news, when I read the newspaper, I almost every sentence or paragraph, I have to remind myself, Jesus came to seek and save the lost.
Christians make too many mistakes when someone comes out to them. They try to advise counseling. At some point, they will throw out Bible verse concerning homosexuality or marriage. Some Christians try to relate and often compare same-sex attractions to other sins like murder, theft, etc. And this causes emotions like depression and anger to usually set in. Unfortunately, these are all the wrong things to do.
Everyone needs counseling. The person coming out probably knows how you interpret the Bible regarding sexuality, and they don't want to be compared to a thief or a serial killer. This is a moment to listen and affirm your love for them. Think of it this way. The people coming out to you have chosen to share a very intimate and personal part of their life, because you are someone they value. You can never get this moment back, and responding the wrong way is devastating.
The only answer to solve this social struggle is to simply demonstrate God upon their lives. And what is God? God is love, and love should be a weapon in order to defeat this social struggle.
Why? Because a theological conviction should never be a catalyst to treat someone poorly. You can accept the person without approving of their choice to be homosexual. Just simply love people while thinking what the Bible teaches. Deepen your relationships but hold firm to conviction. Never give up on the person or scripture. Love never takes sides. Love has no exception clause. Love never harms.